Hey, guess what? The 2025 Writing Excuses Cruise is over 50% sold out. During this week-long masterclass, I'm going to be leading writers like yourself through a series of workshops designed to give you the tools to take your writing to the next level. Space is limited, but there is still time to secure your spot. We're going to be sailing out of Los Angeles from September 18th through 26th. Regardless of where you are in your writing journey, this event is your opportunity to learn new skills while exploring the beautiful Mexican Riviera. Whether you're revising a story, reworking a character arc, or revitalizing your plot, you'll leave more confident in your current story and bolstered by a new set of friends. Join us on board at writingexcuses.com/retreats. This episode of Writing Excuses has been brought to you by our listeners, patrons, and friends. If you would like to learn how to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/writingexcuses. Season 20, Episode 11. This is Writing Excuses.
Kidlit Q&A on the Writing Excuses Cruise with Kate McKean, Mark Oshiro, and Sandra Tayler.
I'm Mary Robinette.
I'm Dan.
I'm Kate McKean.
I'm Mark Oshiro.
And I'm Sandra Tayler.
We are extremely happy to have you here. One of the things we get asked about a lot is writing for kids. Most of the material that we focus on, while it is applicable across the board, is focused on stuff for adults. So we're going to quickly just share with our listeners what our relationship is with writing for kids. I started in puppetry, and so most of my early career was going into elementary schools. I have exactly one picture book. Mm-hmm. So my agent has questions about that.
I'm Kate McKean. I'm a literary agent at the Howard Moorheim Literary Agency, and I have written a YA novel that will remain in the drawer for its whole entire life. But I have a picture book coming out in 2026 called Pay Attention to Me, out by Source Books. And I love children's literature, which I represent and read all the time.
I'm Mark Oshiro. I am the author of 9 middle grade and young adult books, some of which are on lists, have won awards. I love writing for children. I have no plans to stop, and I love talking, particularly the craft of writing for children.
I am Sandra Tayler. I have written 2 picture books, which I self-published, Hold On to Your Horses and Strength of Wild Horses. Both of these grew out of a need in a child that I wanted to answer. I also have extensive experience as being the parent of children to whom I had to read books, and that formed a lot of opinions about children's literature in my head.
And I'm Dan Wells, mostly known for YA, have a best-selling YA series, and of course the Zero G middle grade series, which was an Audible top 10 bestseller 3 years in a row.
I did not know that part.
Yeah.
Wow.
Go you.
Woohoo! Since we are here at the Writing Excuses Cruise, we have an audience full of people that have questions. And so we're going to invite them to ask their questions.
How important is it to have a kid character to anchor a children's book POV? Can children, say middle graders, relate to a world through, say, talking creatures and no kids among the primary or secondary characters?
How important is it to have a kid to anchor a middle grade book? Can it be something that doesn't have any children among the secondary, except among the secondary characters?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can it be something that does not have any children in the primary or secondary characters?
I'd like to start as someone who has written a middle grade book with no children in it. I was very lucky that Lucasfilm Press asked me to write a middle grade adventure novel called Battle for the Arena, where all of the characters are adults. And the way into it that I pitched was I wanted the adult characters to be dealing with situations that were emotionally resonant with younger readers. So in particular, the novel is a fish out of water sort of story where the main character has just moved for unknown reasons to a new city, is part of this like battling troupe of like, they're kind of like in between, like imagine an Overwatch arena full of professional wrestlers. So everyone has their own character that they portray in the arena, but then they're their own people outside of it. And she is joining a group of people who all are part of a clique, who all know each other, who know who their personalities are in this arena and outside of the arena. And she's the weirdo who, by the way, is the only one whose ability in the arena is real because she has the force abilities. Everyone else is play, like they're imagining it. So then there's an extra level of I'm the weirdo on top of being in a group of weirdos, you know, which is fun as someone who grew up watching professional wrestling. I loved playing into those sort of like ridiculous personalities, which is what kids love. So for me, it was every chance I was thinking about what sort of emotional decisions am I making for this main character, I had to also think at the same time, is this someone who is 9 years old, who maybe their only way in is they like Star Wars, they like video games. Is this something that they can relate to? And it was shockingly easy to sort of access those things. So yes, you can absolutely have a middle grade novel. I haven't done young adult with only adult characters, but absolutely can have a middle grade novel with no children in it at all.
Except I'm going to say you absolutely cannot have a middle grade novel or YA novel with only adult children, as my view from a literary agent. And it sounds like why that might have worked with your book, Marcus, because it was an IP project and the people already knew the characters. And so they didn't have to find...
Well, actually, there's a complication. They didn't know the characters.
Oh, okay. Well, it was already in a world. They're like, I'm going to pick up this book because it's in the world that I already like, Star Wars, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so they're like, didn't have to be sold on this. They're just like, it's another Star Wars. I'm sure it was not even that good. No, I'm just kidding. It was just another Star Wars. Just kidding. But if I were to see a query where it was all adults and it was supposed to be a YA or a middle grade novel, I'd be like, where are the kids? And I would have a hard time pitching that to editors. I think there could be exceptions, but if you want to try to be that exception, it's a even steeper hill to climb. And I do even find it hard when there's, say, a YA novel where one POV character is the teacher and one character is the student. It can be done. I'm sure anyone could find me 5 or 10 exceptions, but I find it very hard. The logic from the grown-ups in the room who are probably not, I mean, like the editors and agents and publishers and stuff, is that kids don't care about grown-ups. I don't think that's actually true. I think we are telling ourselves that, but I have had a lot of trouble selling books where a POV character is an adult in a YA or middle grade book.
I will say that one of the reasons that you might think that you can get away with it is because frequently there are books that are shelved in YA that have only adult characters in them, but they were not sold that way. They were usually written by women, and women will get shelved in YA whether or not they are writing YA often.
I'm thinking about a lot of picture books as well. And at least when I grew up, these decades and decades ago, stuff like Mike Mulligan and Steam Shovel, where the main characters are all adults with jobs, and the story is about them doing their job really well. Even in those, there is a secondary kid, usually, who's there to say, Mike Mulligan can do it. And...
Isn't that actually the Steam Shovel that's the main character, not Mike Mulligan?
I think it's both of them.
Okay, yeah, because
welcome to our Mike Mulligan and Steam Shovel panel.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, you might be able to get away with it if they're all inanimate objects.
I say, anthropomorphized theme is absolutely a...
But even there, it's always like
they're usually aged down animals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you're writing a story where the target audience is typically kids who won't necessarily pick out their own books, who usually need others like librarians or teachers or parents to recommend books, how do you balance trying to appeal to the kid versus trying to appeal to adults who forward the book to kids?
This was the problem with puppet theater. So I want to be clear that there is the audience that you're writing for, and there are the people who are buying tickets, and they are not the same. So when you write it for the audience. And when you pitch it, when you do your catalog copy, when you do your query letter, you write it for the adults. Those are two different stories.
And I think that you should not think too much about the teachers and the librarians, because they are looking, not that you should ignore them and that they're not valuable in the process, is that they are also trying to entertain the kids or trying to get the book to the kid. And they can see the themes, they can see the subject matter that's important. So just keep talking to the kid. And when you're pitching it to, say, an agent or something, you will talk about it like a grown-up. You wouldn't, like, hey, dudes, this is cool. You should read it. Like, no one's going to do that. But I would just keep the reader in the forefront.
I wrote one book thinking about the adults who would read it, which was my first book, Anger is a Gift. Because at that time, especially in YA and middle grade, there was a lot of talk about what was appropriate to be in a book. And when you haven't been published and you have that fear of, well, I want to make sure it gets accepted. One of the biggest ones was don't swear in books. So this was 10 years ago when I was working on this book. So even though I knew the actual content of the book might be something that we deemed inappropriate, one thing that I was very particular about was I'm not going to have any sort of language that could get the book pegged as inappropriate. So in Anger is a Gift, there's one, I think, very appropriately placed F-bomb in the whole book. But the irony is, I know I held back in certain ways, and particularly in making the language of teenagers realistic, and then that is now my most banned book. So it didn't matter anyway. They banned it by the droves, So every book I have written since then, I don't care about it at all. I am thinking of who is the kid who is reading this. If educators find something in it, if librarians find something in it that they believe that they can use either to teach or to reach a kid emotionally who needs that is wonderful, but I don't think about it anymore.
Yeah, as a concrete example, every English teacher that I am friends with kind of across the board hates Captain Underpants, but they love it because it gets kids reading. So even though it holds no appeal for them, it doesn't have a lot of adult appeal at all, it still gets recommended, it still gets assigned, it still gets a lot of play.
One of the things that we would have to do when we were doing public theater is we'd have to get things to match curriculum. The thing is, the shelf life for that is one season. And you can't, the turnaround is also very fast frequently. So often what we would do is we would find out what the curriculum was, and then we would explain to them why this show that we have had for 20 years met this curriculum. It is about just telling a different story.
When I wrote the picture book that I wrote, to Hold On to Your Horses, it was because I knew a specific child needed a specific story, and I couldn't find the book that already had that story in it, so I went and wrote it. And the thing I have discovered since then, as this book is now 15 years old, it's been out in print, and I have adults who had it as a kid who are now giving it to their children, which is a whole thing in my head. But realizing that these adults also have a child who needs this story. And so going back to the idea of you need to tell the story to the child and trust the adults to also know a child that needs that story and to lead this other child to the story that you've written.
So specifically for middle grade and children's lit, is what's played out? What subgenres, subject matters, are things that there's just too much of?
So specifically for middle grade and children's lit, what is played out? What is too much? So tired. Kate.
Why would I be the one to know?
Yeah.
Trying to be Captain Underpants, trying to be Wimpy Kid.
Yeah.
We got those. They're good. I personally see a lot of like the gross out stories from Mars and the glorby blobs will eat you. Like those kind of stories do not resonate. I also think that there are an abundance of really depressing stories in that age group when like they're valuable, but I do think kids are kind of wanting some fun. So I would personally want to see a lot more fun middle grade without going into goof. Just fun, just cool, fun stuff. And graphic novels are still hot, hot, hot.
Yeah. I was going to say, the reason that Captain Underpants and Wimpy Kid were so incredibly huge is that they were transgressive. They're the book that the kid knows the librarian doesn't actually like to offer this book. And they feel like they got away with something by getting to read it. But the interesting thing about transgressive literature is one generation's transgressive becomes the next generation's, those are the classics. Yes, we all love Captain Underpants. We all are familiar with it. And so it doesn't feel like you're getting away with something. And so a useful way to approach it, if you want to chase the trends, which I don't actually advise, is look at what's super popular right now and how it's transgressive and figure out how your story can push a boundary differently or a different boundary or answer a need. In the kids, it's looking at the conditions of life now. The kids who have hit school since the pandemic have a different life experience than the kids who hit school and then pandemic hit in the middle of 5th or 6th grade. There is stories out there that they need, and the transgressions that they need in order to cope are going to be different. So it's being tapped into what's now.
We mentioned it earlier, talking about adults in kidlit. The animal books, like main characters are all anthropomorphized animals or wild animals. Like those were real big, especially in middle grade for a long time. I have not met a kid in like 5 years who's like super amped on the animal book.
If you have a story that has an ensemble of kids that have a really wide range of ages, like you have a 13-year-old and a 19-year-old, same story, how do you decide if you're writing a middle grade or a YA? Do you market it differently? How do you make those choices?
If you've got a story with a wide range of children ages, like a 13-year-old and a 19-year-old, how do you decide if you're writing middle grade or YA?
If I looked at something and they said 13 to 19, I would say it's YA. I usually kind of tag middle grade as 8 to 12, but the reader is reading up a little bit. So the reader is like 7, 8, 9. But if I had younger kids and older kids, like younger than 13, I might look at the primary character and the primary conflict. And if the primary conflict is between the 16-year-old and the 19-year-old, like that would be a YA novel to me. I have not come across many novels that fit this description, so I've not really ever been in that problem.
I would actually also look at the conflict and its emotional struggle, because people ask me all the time, like, how do you know an idea is middle grade or YA? Yeah. And for me, it's about scope and that character's awareness of their place in the world. If you are having a character, or at least the main character, if their struggle is, I am just learning my place in my immediate group of friends, in my family, maybe in my school, and like sort of, which is not to say that middle grade novels can't have that wide scope, but generally speaking, it's like when you're in the 8 to 12, you're just starting to get your awareness of the world. And then I find with my YA, that's where it is, you are starting to figure out your place in the entire world. You're starting to have to acknowledge that there are people outside of your city, outside your immediate group of friends. How do I fit in this? I tend to find that in YA, you may have emotional plots that are more existential in nature. What is my purpose in the world or whatnot? And so think about the scope of what your adventure is, and does it seem like something for someone whose mindset is of a much younger age versus someone who's, a mid to older teen?
It's also very useful to have some understanding of the emotional developmental stages that kids and teens go through. I really love the book, and I'm blanking on the author's name, but the title is Untangled, the Guiding Girls Through the 7 Transitions to Adulthood. And it talks about, these stages that teenage girls go through, from saying goodbye to childhood to finding your tribe to pushing back against authority, and that these stages hit and are fairly measurable in a young person's life. And if you know what those stages are, there's definitely things that preteens do and care about, and things that a 15-year-old thinks about and cares about. And the exact age of one particular child hits those things will vary a lot, but we all go through these transitional stages. And if you know and figure out and peg your story and say, this is a saying goodbye to childhood story, well, that probably lands in the, 7 to 13 age group, because that's about when kids are doing that. Whereas the off into adulthood, that's your classic group coming of age story. That's 16, 17, 18 up there. And then you're in a YA range. So we're looking, again, like Mark said, at the themes and what the themes are telling you.
Well, speaking of themes, I think it is time for us to go to our homework.
Writing excuses, your homework, specifically thinking about writing for children. Imagine a moment from your childhood, something contentious with conflict that is perhaps more low-level rather than world-ending or traumatic. Now, write this moment in first or third person, but imagine it is happening to someone else. How would you write this scene? How would you tap into the character's emotions through voice and tone?
This has been Writing Excuses. You're out of excuses. Now go write. Writing Excuses has been brought to you by our listeners, patrons, and friends. This episode of Writing Excuses was engineered by Marshall Carr Jr., produced by Emma Reynolds, and engineered by Alex Jackson. Your hosts for this episode were Mary Robinette Kowal, Mark Oshiro, Kate McKean, Dan Wells, and Sandra Tayler. This episode was recorded live at the Writing Excuses cruise aboard the Navigator of the Seas. For more information, visit writingexcuses.com.